The world talks about climate change, overshadowed by the U.S.'s planned withdrawal. What progress will be made and what still lies ahead if a detailed plan of the so-called Paris Agreement is to be reached next year? Welcome to The Point. I'm Li Xin.
Shortly after the doors opened on the first day of the so-called UN's Conference of the Parties, or COP23, officials announced that 2017 is on track to be the hottest year on record. This year, delegates will focus on how to break that trend by detailing the implementation of the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, which strives to limit a rise in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees by transitioning to renewable energies by the end of the century. But it never outlined exactly how that could be done. Scientists say in our current state, global temperatures will rise by 3 degrees during that time. Few countries are experiencing the threat of those rising temperatures as much as the small South Pacific island nation of Fiji, where rising sea levels have destroyed portions of the country. Vulnerable countries such as Fiji must be put center stage, said Germany's environment minister. The host country kicked off the conference with a pledge to raise Germany's contribution to the Climate Change Adaptation Fund by 50 million euros. Meanwhile, protesters colored the streets outside the summit venue, demanding governments do more to curb global warming. Also notable on day one was the small number of delegates from the world's biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, the United States, following President Donald Trump's withdrawal from the Paris Agreement earlier this year.
The ongoing 2-week-long UN climate change talks, also known as the 23rd Conference of Parties, or COP, is taking place in Bonn, Germany. It aims to explore a technical and operational implementation roadmap for the Paris Agreement, while obstacles and setbacks like the US's withdrawal and some industries' reluctance to go green are taxing minds there. For the first time, a small island nation, Fiji, is chairing the climate talks. So what challenges are there still left for detailed and practical measures to be taken to tackle climate change by 2020? What progress are we likely to see from this round of talks, and how will China's proposals and practices influence the threshold phase of the implementation of the Paris Agreement? I'm joined in the studio today by Professor Qi Ye from the School of Public Policy and Management at Tsinghua University, and Harvey Zoding, a research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. First of all, Professor Qi, how significant is this round of climate talk? We know that by 2020, this Paris Agreement is expected to take effect. What is the significance of the talks going on in Bonn this year?
These talks of COPs, we say there are big years and small years. This is one of the small years. Nevertheless, it is very significant because by 2018 next year, we should come up with an implementation plan. So even though it is not highly expected, this year is very important to set the foundation to leading to next year. This year, and we're hoping to see some significant and solid progress being made, but with the U.S. withdrawal, and looks like we're having a lot of difficulty now in Bonn.
Tell us about the U.S., Harvey, the presence of the federal government delegation in Bonn. There has been quite some media coverage on that. What is the picture there?
Well, the picture is that it's a skeletal delegation, a fairly low-level delegation, and the U.S. government has been playing this conference in a very low-key way, because there's a lot of debates going on within career civil service versus top political appointees, those who've been appointed. Also, there's actually at least 2 delegations from America there. One is the official federal government delegation, and the other one is called the People's Delegation. It's comprised of people like former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and Governor Jerry Brown of California. These are people who take a diametrically opposed position to President Trump and his administration.
Well, a little bit of a technical background here. President Trump announced that the U.S. will withdraw from the Paris Climate Change Agreement in June this year, causing worldwide reaction and a lot of condemnations. But what will be the timetable for the withdrawal to actually happen?
There's a 4-year clock that's running from the announcement. So there's 4 years to reverse this decision. Many people believe that one way or another the decision will be reversed. There's also a small possibility that it could be reversed in a year, but that requires some legalistic gymnastics and is possible but unlikely.
Professor Chi, how is this 4-year period basically coinciding with the 4 year ahead of the Paris Agreement coming into effect, potentially affecting the negotiation and consultation leading to this implementation plan?
Well, first of all, I think this 4-year, this legal technicality doesn't really matter that much, because the whole idea of a Paris Agreement is based on the concept of INDC, means the intended nationally determined contributions.
Voluntary commitment.
It's a voluntary. It really depends on each individual country for the implementation. Therefore, as soon as the President, head of state, announce a withdrawal, and you may say it takes effect immediately, because that means it does not have to, from the federal level, does not really making any effort to address the climate change. On the other hand, though, just as mentioned earlier, there is a people's delegation. There are levels of government at the state level, at the city level, and county level, and the local, and also the people level. Right? That is some of the effort still going on. So I think now we have a dual track. You have a government track, the federal government track, then you have a people's track.
Yeah.
Right?
However, this dual track, I mean, the message is mixed, right? Or very clear, basically, from the government side, the federal government side, they don't want to continue. However, without the U.S.'s federal government taking part in the negotiation, is that going to make a difference to the plan?
It is going to make a huge difference. First of all, for this climate financing, this has been a problem for the last quarter of a century. Ever since 1992, UNFCCC was coined, was first formulated, and this has never been resolved. And United States, taking the biggest share among all the developed countries who are expected to contribute to this $100 billion climate finance, without participation of the federal government in the United States, and there will be no way. I'm quite pessimistic on this. And also for other levels, for the mitigation, the reduction of greenhouse gases, and without participation of the United States, then you can't really fill in. That's a very big gap. We're talking about 12, 14% of the emissions. So I think, and also more importantly, the United States being the largest developed countries and the largest contributor to greenhouse gases from the developed world, and with the absence of the U.S., and it would be really hard to form this alliance for climate change.
This kind of symbolic meaning.
Absolutely.
As well. Yeah.
Right.
Howie.
Yeah, I also think it's a slap in the face at China and President Xi Jinping. We've just come off last week this very good meeting between the two presidents, but President Obama and President Xi worked very hard to cobble together this historic agreement. China, the leading greenhouse gas emitter, America, the leading greenhouse gas emitter over time. And so to pull out like this is like pulling the rug out from under President Xi. I think it doesn't look good.
Well, still, President Trump insists that, or he has been denying the effects of climate change. He doesn't believe in it. We have been seeing very dramatic hurricanes wreaking havoc in, the regions, for instance, in Puerto Rico, affected by Hurricane Maria, killing 500 people and more. Why is the President Trump's administration still adopting this head-in-the-sand approach?
I think if there was a Nobel Prize for head in the sand, President Trump would be a good nominee for this, because he only has to look around at our own country and see the horrible events that have happened this year. it's just politics. In a way, it's a chapter out of Karl Marx, it's a chapter out of Das Kapital, because this is the greedy capitalists, the coal interests and things who are pulling the strings of the Trump administration, especially these two brothers called the Koch brothers. And so it's just politics. And I think that it's at the expense of not only our country, but the world in many ways.
However, it is not 100% established that there is a direct linkage, right, between these extreme weather patterns and climate change. Professor Chi, what is your argument?
Well, we have to make a distinction between a particular weather event and the overall trend of climate change. Yes, indeed, for any particular weather event, you can't really pin down the direct link between the two. However, for this overall trend of the change of the climate, and that is very well established science, there is no question about it. And that trend includes the extreme weather events. We have more and more weather extremes. Maybe
not those particular ones, but in general, the trend is pretty clear.
Exactly.
Something very interesting happened recently. The United States federal government released a consensus report on the environment. It was peer-reviewed by the National Academy of Sciences. Yet it goes 180 degrees against the Trump administration's policy. It doesn't say that the cause of environmental disasters that we've had and climate change is man-made, but it says there's no other cause other than man-made for this to have happened. So it shows to me that the Trump administration is a maladministration, that one side doesn't know what the other's doing. And I read that the reason the report was allowed to go is that the president is more concerned about getting his tax reform passed than about the environment.
Let's hear a little bit more from what's happening on site in Bonn, Germany, and we are joined by Professor Fu Peng-Cheng from the State Key Laboratory of Marine Resource Utilization in the South China Sea at Hainan University. Professor Fu, thank you very much for joining us from Bonn.
Hello.
Yes, tell us a bit about the atmosphere there. We are already quite a few days into the meeting, about to wrap things up. Any progress so far?
COP23 is an informal name for the 23rd conference of party, and it happened in Bonn, Germany from November 6 to November 17, I guess. And people here are very excited to exchange their ideas about how to deal with the climate change and how we can act as a community, as a big family, to reduce the emission and try to also deal with the environmental issues. So far, based on my data, more than 10,000 people has registered. The number will be increased. I would say in total it should be over 25,000 people participate in this kind of exciting event.
It's interesting. I heard the number of the federal government delegation of the United States is about 48. What are you seeing there? What are you observing of the U.S. government delegation's behavior on a federal level?
The U.S. will withdraw from the international effort on the Paris Agreement. However, we can see that even inside the U.S., there's some other people. They recognize the importance and the urgency for us to deal with the climate change issue and try to participate in the climate action, so that all the people around the world should work together, should have a concerted effort, try to reduce the emissions and try to reduce the environmental pollutions. So the federal government of the United States, they may, I guess, may rethink their conditions and their consideration of the withdrawal.
Okay, you have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll get back to Professor Fu and the other two guests when we come back after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking about the climate change talks taking place in Bonn, Germany. And I'm getting back to Professor Fu, who is standing by on site from the COP23. Professor Fu, how do you look at the ongoing discussion in terms of what the COP has achieved up to now? Do you see a promising implementation plan to be finalized next year in time for the implementation of the Paris Agreement?
The purpose of this convention, or the COP23, is to encourage continuing dialogue, so-called Telenova dialogue, which will have people to negotiate, the people from the developing countries, from the developed countries. They should sit together, try to work out a plan, a reasonable plan and a feasible plan, so that international community will work together, use all the resources to participate in the climate action, so that it is quite promising that all the people participate in this event, this convention. They have shown their momentum to keep going with the Paris Agreement, regardless of what's happened in this year. I mean, the president decided to withdraw. However, all the people will still keep going.
Yeah, I understand.
I hope that this kind of discussion and the negotiation.
I see. What has China brought with itself?
To good results.
Yeah, what has China brought over to the conference in terms of detailed proposals, and how have these proposals been received by the fellow participants?
China is a responsible big country in the world, and he is very active in the participation. And I saw a so-called China Pavilion, which will provide the information about how the Chinese government have done in the last decade to reduce the emission, how the Chinese government tried to increase the energy efficiency. All this will be part of the international actions towards the reduction of the emission. So that I would say Chinese government is quite active and actually is taking the leading role in this issue. So I hope that in the future, Chinese government will keep their momentum to encourage all the people to get together to have a active discussion.
Thank you very much.
Negotiation.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Fu Pengcheng from Hainan University, joining us from Bonn, Germany. And back here in the studio, Professor Chi and Harvey Zoding. Let's talk a bit about China's input here. China has said it's not going to step back from its commitment made during the Paris climate change talks. What specific proposals have China raised for the implementation plan to be finalized?
Well, first of all, as you said, China will stand firm with its original commitment to the Paris Agreement. Secondly, very importantly, China will work with other developing countries to cope with the impact of climate change, at the same time to help the developing countries, particularly the least developed countries and the small island countries, to address the climate change issues by investing, putting the money into that, the so-called South-South Climate Cooperation Fund, and started with a $3.1 billion in 2015, and then last year President Xi announced adding another $1 billion to this fund. This is a very, very important. So far, this has been the largest contribution from any single individual country. Thirdly, China calls the developed countries for this dialogue to come in for the essential elements, financing, technology transfer, and also to fulfill their own NDCs to the climate change. I now kind of emphasizing on this concept of human beings as a community with a shared destiny. This is highlighted, with the updated plan for China, and that means, and China would be willing to work with other countries, developing and developed countries alike, to hopefully by next year we can have a solid implementation plan. Right.
Harvey?
Yeah, it's very interesting that in the conference in Bonn they have a Fiji canoe. And this is a canoe that's an ocean-going vessel. And the reason it's there is a symbolic one, to show that we're all in the same boat when it comes to climate change. I think it's really an important message. And to follow up on what the professor said, China is now having to bear a much greater burden on climate change because of the American decision. And also, the professor in Bonn was talking about the China pavilion. This is the first year America has not had a pavilion now, and Mayor Bloomberg said that the government isn't going to pay for it. He will.
Yeah, indeed. It's a good thing that in the United States, even if the Trump administration has a different voice, a lot of people are still going ahead on the effort of going green. However, you also mentioned Fiji. It's very interesting. This is also the first time that a least developed country, an island nation, is hosting this talks as a chair country. And because Fiji does not have the capacity to do it in their home country, so they're doing it in Bonn, where the UNFCCC is based. However, some people are saying exactly that because of the lack of presence of the U.S. Government, China needs to fill the financial void. For instance, Liu Xingming, deputy head of the development of Climate Change of National Development and Reform Commission, has clarified that making more effort to deal with climate does not mean that China will fill the financial vacuum left by the United States. So exactly why is China pumping more resources into the South-South of Climate Fund? Is it because China wants to take over the leadership, or China sees, a vacuum, which is a good opportunity to fill, to show its leadership? What is the consideration in
Starting 25 years ago, when the UNFCCC was first formed, and it was formed based on this principle called the common but differentiated responsibility. And that means those who are responsible for the majority of the problem, namely climate change, should pay for it, should make effort for that. But we have been talking about it, but we have never fulfilled that responsibility. I mean, to make the developed countries to pay for that. China sees the need. This is really there is a huge need to do this, and particularly in the developing world, they need the help. So China is not the obligation there. China is not fulfilling the responsibility for the developed countries, but China would like lending is a helping hand to address this issue. I think that's therefore the expectation that China to address this issue is not realistic. China is still a large developing country and still have huge task to address the poverty issue, and but China is willing to help, just from this idea of we're on the same boat. Yeah. And we need to address the problem.
Harvey, you follow the 19th National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, during which Chinese President Xi Jinping laid out this notion of building a beautiful China, which is a very new idea. But he has actually been emphasizing the ecological side of China's development for a long time. How do you look at the kind of blueprint that President Xi has set and its implication in the climate change negotiations?
It was very clear from his 3.5-hour speech that the environment was one of the most, if not the most important issue in this new era And because of that, China is taking, and has been taking, and will take even more muscular efforts to contribute to the climate change dilemma that the world is facing. And so I think this is as it should be. China would like to be more and more involved in multilateral activities, whereas in my country, in the U.S., it's go it alone, my way or the highway. This is not the way to be. I think China is going to win many more friends with its beautiful policy than we will with ours.
Yeah, Professor Chi, one more minute time left. What are the biggest challenges China is faced with, where China needs to go, whether or not the United States is side by side?
Well, the challenge inside China is we're still facing this unbalanced development and inadequate development, and there are huge resource needs for fulfilling that. At the same time, China would like to play a bigger role for this global governance, including global climate governance. That means we're not only a participant, we would like to be a contributor and to a builder of a new version of the global governance.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We have Professor Chi from the School of Public Policy and Management at Tsinghua University, and Harvey Zoding, a research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. That is it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow us on Twitter or visit our Facebook page using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got the point.